Everyone, and welcome back to GameDive. This is part two of our discussion on the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Make sure to check out part one for our conversation on the gameplay systems, because this episode we're going to be talking mostly about the story, world building, and kind of overall presentation of the game. So with that, Mark, why don't you start us off with your thoughts on those elements?
Sure. Yeah. So, as a quick recap, this game takes place around 200 years after the events of Oblivion, the previous Elder Scrolls title, and essentially you are the last Dragonborn, and
Are you the last one or just the most recent?
I
I
think
think
you
it's most
are,
recent.
I think they're most just an incarnation this time around.
yeah, like the latest incarnation of the Dragonborn. Because I mean, there's no other Dragonborn in the game besides you,
As far as we know.
Till the
as far
DLC.
as
Very exclusive.
until DLC. Yeah, you're right. But yeah, so essentially, you are the chosen one to face this unstoppable threat. And I've honestly never actually finished the main quest line in any playthrough. I've gotten far enough, and I remember, like, eventually I just looked it up, like watching a playthrough. So there's
Yeah, I mean,
points where,
it's not crucial to the experience, I
yeah,
think.
like you can experience Skyrim, or just do the main quest. What I find interesting is that the main quest is kind of split into two different halves. So you have like the Dragon Crisis, and then you have the Civil War of Skyrim between the Imperials and the Stormcloaks, and like they both kind of interact at a certain point of the main story, and you can do either one before the other. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the first, I think maybe two or three quests in the main storyline, I would say are pretty essential, like going to Bleak Falls Barrow and taking down the first dragon and then going up to High Hrothgar. Those are pretty essential to unlocking some of the more base mechanics, like the shouting and, of course, finding new words of power.
mhm.
But like I just said, the main story is almost secondary to, I think, the overall experience. You definitely can do it and are encouraged to, but this game is really like such a pure role-playing experience in that you can make this decision for your character that maybe my Dragonborn doesn't give a shit about his destiny or doesn't, isn't interested in that. Is more wants to explore what's going on with the Thieves Guild or whatever.
Yeah, because especially because like throughout the main story, you actually like make inter connections with the Thieves Guild or the College of Winterhold.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely like you can branch out into those parts at like any point in time. And what I also find interesting is that in the recent playthrough, I noticed there's no real like emergence to like actually, oh, I gotta, I have to go defeat Alduin. It's like there's this dragon crisis going on. We gotta hurry up and get this done. This is like,
Yeah,
oh.
the game kind of falls for the old test and true. The world's in grave danger. I'm gonna go do some mining for a little while. Good luck, guys. But
Yeah.
like you were both saying, I think one of the reasons the game works so well is because the main storyline isn't necessary to get a full experience out of the game. I think that what it does really well is having the Civil War and Dragonborn arcs is that it will give a player who doesn't have anything else to do or doesn't want to like go out and do their own thing themselves, it gives them some structure to follow. So regardless of whether you want to ignore it and let the world burn or follow it and become this legendary dragonborn hero in universe, it gives that player an option. You're
Right.
never losing a player because they didn't know what to do or they didn't have any drive to go and do something that they weren't told to do, kind of.
Yeah, because like I remember my first playthrough, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna go do the companions quest line, and then hunt a bunch of Daedric artifacts, and then like by the time I was like, oh, I guess I should probably do the main story now, and like I got all the way up to Skyhaven Temple, got the Elder Scroll, and then that was it. That's when my save file got corrupted.
Well, what I really like is that is if you want to play it, like that's how you can play it and you're not doing it wrong. And to compare this with either Fallout 4 or Fallout 3, those games I think miss the mark a little more in trying to give the player a more structured story to follow. In Fallout 4, for example, you're a parent whose son is missing, and the main quest is you got to find them or find him. And it makes less sense in that context that you would be fucking around in like an old vault looking for loot when you should be looking for your missing son.
Less
Then it
sense than
doesn't.
the come of the end of the world.
Well, less sense in
I know,
that
like
you're
the
just the
emotional
Dragonborn.
drive, yeah, the emotional
Yeah, your
drive that you
character.
should be trying to find your son compared to helping these people you don't even know.
Well, exactly, and I think that that works a lot better for me
Mhm.
because your character is kind of a blank slate when you start, which I think is what any good RPG should do.
Keeping the Bethesda tradition of you are a prisoner of, and for reasons unknown, here you are.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I played an Argonian the first time. I don't know why this this lizard man from Blackmarsh would give any shit about what's going on in Skyrim.
Was there a reason you picked the Argonian, by the way, compared to any of the
Um,
other races?
I just thought
You
he was
you
neat,
like
I guess.
lizards?
Liz is
Yeah.
cool as fuck.
I just think it's kinda neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the main storyline, there isn't that much to talk about in terms of, how much it might affect certain, like, every player's playthrough because obviously it's all gonna be different, but I know I can say that the first time I played this game, I really stuck to both main quest lines. Like, I think I eventually got to the Civil War arc a bit later in, but I really just, you know, quest to quest to quest was doing the Dragonborn arc, and, it really did help me. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I always had something to do, but the second playthrough, I currently chose to ignore it. I still haven't really gotten into it. I think I've
See ya.
somewhat started the Civil War arc, but, you know, the stuff I enjoyed more going back to it was stuff I just happened upon, like
That's one of the ways that just stories in general work, right? I mean, you've already played through what the story has to offer, and you understand its plot devices, and you understand the turns it's going to take. So, I think naturally, it's not going to be as interesting the first time. But I think, like you say, I bet a lot of people, I did too, didn't like just blitz the main story, but went through it at a decent pace because that was what's presented to you, and that's the most immediately engaging thing.
and even in terms of the actual story it tells, I do think that the, happened upon quests and storylines are more interesting. I mentioned earlier the Daedric quest for Dawnbreaker, where you find the orb and have to get that back to the shrine. But I thought that sort of storyline was super interesting. It was unique. It brought into the story like the lore of the world and sort of interaction with these Daedric princes and stuff. And it's the same with a lot of the other Daedric quests, but I found that those were more compelling than, the expected, good guys versus bad guys, save the world stuff.
I think the subject matter is just better.
And it also feels more special that you had to find this orb, for example, in order
Mhm.
to activate the quest, which is not, and no one runs down the road and says, "Oh, hey, you gotta come go to Meridia's temple or whatever it is," and.
Yeah.
Also, the stakes are just different. The stakes different being where you're just dealing with, dragons show up versus holy shit, this is practically a god telling me to do stuff, and they're pretty whack.
I remember like one of the earlier side quests is when you get to Winterhold, like outside the gate you see a bunch of Valkyrie like warriors, and then at some point they ask you, "Hey, can you find this red guard?"
Mhm.
And then from then on, like you have a choice. Like there's always that choice of whether you tell the Valkyrie warriors that, "Oh, I found her," or you follow with the red guard lady to like delve like deep, like why is she being hunted essentially.
I actually think that is another thing to bring up is I really found it interesting in that quest in particular where by the end you don't know who was right. You
Yeah.
had to form your opinions based on the information they both told you, and there's nothing tells you at the end you killed the people who were trying to find the person they were telling the truth and you screwed up. It's, you did what you thought was right based on the information you had and you had to live with it. If afterwards you thought, "Oh, maybe she wasn't really innocent," then, that's your fault then.
You have to live with that for the rest of your life.
Yep.
Well, that's the thing is if you help her and you go and you just like kill all the Alakir guys, then she just like, oh, thank you, I'm safe now, and he just kind of ends there. But if you choose to turn her in, then you get their side of the story, which is a cool bit of storytelling. But at the same time, I kind of wish that if I chose to help Sadie, which is I think the lady's name, I wish I wasn't missing out on this bit of of lore.
And I mean, that sort of just is a side effect of this style of open RPG, where if there's choices to be made, you can't always have both.
That's
You know,
true.
it is a choice. You have to choose one or the other.
Especially on small side quests where it's not really worth finding different ways to tell the story.
And I do think that in that quest, if you choose to turn her in, once you do, you can still go and side with her. So you can get I'm fairly certain that you can get their side and then spin around and save her anyways. And then you get I think there's a way to actually get both rewards, but it's kind
by
of a
cheating the system, like
it's
if
kind of,
air
you know,
quotes cheating.
not the intended way to do it, I think, but it's possible to experience both sides to a point.
Yeah, like I definitely enjoyed like those kinds of quests more so than being told, "Oh yeah, here's a place, go to it, clear it out, and get the reward."
Of which there are many.
Oh yeah, like especially when you unlock the raiding quests, like after you do like the companions or any of the other factions, it's like, oh, okay, well, cool. I'm just gonna go to X dungeon, clear it out, come back and reward versus actually going through, kind of like its own
Well,
story.
actually, exactly. Getting one of those smaller stories, which is what this game does so well by
Mhm.
having so many of them.
Like I remember once you reach like level 10 and you enter Solitude, you get the Man Who Cried Wolf quest line, which you delve into a dungeon, but then you like learn about the Wolf Queen coming back, and then
Right.
the
Oh
first
yeah.
time around you stop it, and then a bit later, once you're a bit more stronger, you get another quest as a follow up to it. It's like, nah, she's back now. It's like, oh, okay, well,
Hmm. Yeah, actually, that's another good point. These quests that start minor but suddenly like exponentially turn into something crazy. Like when I did that, I didn't expect to go into this underground city where there's this resurrection thing happening and dealing with all this stuff. So it's interesting how it can go from like a little cave dive into this expansive like quest line with these unique elements and different story elements happening as well. But I did actually want to go back and talk about the Civil War arc quickly before we moved on to other stuff because in at risks of starting a political discussion here, I thought it was interesting that the first time I played this, yeah, I was younger and I thought, obviously the Stormcloaks were the cool guys. They're the rebels who are fighting against the man, and they're trying to do their own thing, and Ulfric looks cool and whatever. And going back and playing it now, I expected I'd be going with the Stormcloaks again, but being more aware of the storytelling that was happening, it was quite a bit more complex than I had realized the first time because the Nords, the Stormcloaks are their whole thing is that they want Skyrim for themselves. They think it's their land that
an independent
yeah, but
product.
they think that other races shouldn't be there. That
That's definitely where I got off board. Where it's like, all right, you're trying to get your stuff back. You're trying to fight off like the Dominion that feels
sure,
like they're
yeah,
crushing you, and it's like a really romanticized rebellion. And then you just realize, like, wait a minute, like
they're
most of these
super
guys are just
racist.
racist. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
oh
so I thought
shit.
that was a really interesting thing that they put in because they didn't shy away from that, and it gives you the option to side with it depending on your own views on the matter, which, it depends on the person, but it's the same. Once I realized, like, hold on a sec, I went and sided with the Legion because it's not a shallow story necessarily, despite not being necessary to enjoying the game. They really did put a lot of thought and depth into the options and story of that quest line.
I think majority of my playthroughs I've always sided with Stormcloaks because I just want to kill Imperials for their armor. So I was always like, I just find their armor just so aesthetically pleasing.
I think that's actually why the Stormcloaks started the war too. I think I find yeah, it
Yeah,
says
forget
that on
about the ban
Wikipedia.
on Talus worship. It's all about the armor, real quick.
It's a nice bit of choice that they give you two between the two. Because I mean, the Stormcloaks are clearly they have a just cause, but they're kind of being dicks about it. And the Legion was about to murder you for no reason. So it's not like either of these things are super great. They both like have these
Yeah,
negative aspects, but
it's
you have to
very
choose.
gray. It's no bad guy, good guy.
Yeah, I like that.
And I think if you're gonna try to tell a story like this in this kind of game, this kind of open world RPG, this is the best way to do it. And Fallout New Vegas does a great job of it as well with the NCR and the Legion. Wait, they call the Legion in that too?
Yeah.
How many legions are there?
Well, they've just lasted
Uh,
a very long time, I think.
yeah,
Caesar's
that's right.
Legion, yeah.
Caesar's Legion. That's right.
And they
Yeah.
all seem to have like this Gecko Roman aesthetic to them.
With the
And
football
yeah,
pads.
and there it's a
Yeah.
very similar thing of the NCR is kind of the government figure, so they kind of at first glance seem like maybe the obvious choice. Although the Legion, eh, I'm not gonna act like they're exactly the good guys because they literally eat people, so that's it's not good. But
That's a knockoff, I think.
yeah, they lose points for eating people. Anyway, I digress.
But yeah, I think that when we think about some of the best story-based RPGs that we've played, like, New Vegas is considered by a lot of people an incredible game and one of the best games in the Fallout series. I think that
That's a nuclear opinion there, but I will let it go.
That's for another day.
But I think that a lot of people or a lot of games that do really well in terms of story do have a more complex story, a more gray story, where
Yeah.
the ones that people really remember aren't the black and white, good versus evil. It's the ones where you really do have to think about it, where there are more consequences to the actions that you're having than just the good guys win.
Well, moral gray area just kind of entices thought, like
Yeah.
intrinsically. So I think it's just a very, very useful storytelling tool.
And I think it allows the player to kind of feel more pride in their decisions, I guess. If you kind of are standing up for what you believe in effectively in the game world, or what
Hmm.
your character believes in if you're playing it that way.
Which is nice that you get to do it there, because most of the time, if you try to stand up for what you believe in, like the Daedric quests, they say, "The fuck's the matter with you? Don't you want to be cool?" And then like don't give you their items.
Yeah.
Don't you want this cool artifact, bro? Just trust me.
Yeah, it's like I found myself in the Mythic Dawn quest where you're getting Mehrunes razor that I would have let the guy live in the end because you're given the choice where you have to kill the guy who was the quest giver and trying to create this museum for his family heritage, which was in the Mythic Dawn. Which, an aside, was actually really cool once I sort of watched some Oblivion playthrough, realizing how much of it was actually carried over because that was actually the main issue in that game. But being like, I didn't want to kill the guy, but that's a real nice dagger. So
Right.
You do what you got to do.
yeah, and that I guess is another choice to be made that's given to the player, like get this really cool thing or do what you want or what you think is right. So it's a tougher choice, but realistically, I guess it is still a choice.
And those Daedric quests were definitely the most interesting for me playing it the first time. Um, they always had the most interesting storylines and the most interesting rewards, I think.
Definitely the
And
best rewards.
Yes.
possibly some of the most interesting characters in the story as well. Like the
Yeah.
Daedric princes are super interesting. They're they are crazy in some aspects, and some of them they're funny if you're doing the quest line with the dog. I can't remember its name.
Oh, Clavicus Vile.
Clavicus Vile, like that guy, that quest line's also one of my favorites just because the characters are so great.
Yeah, bizarrely witty for the rest of
Yeah.
the game.
Yeah, it seems like with the princes that they really just went crazy with the creativity involved with them.
Well, Skyrim also has the boon of having 5 or 4 previous entries in the series for them to build lore and shape the world. And you can
Yeah.
see that all over the place, where obviously there are races that aren't native to Skyrim and places that we've already seen in previous games. Like, for example, we've been to Morrowind, we've seen the Dark Elves, we've been through that area. And same thing with the Daedric Lords, right? We've seen a ton of them in Oblivion, and having them already flushed out, it really adds to the feeling of wholeness of the story and the world itself.
So definitely being the 5th in a series that's so expansive already was a benefit, but you'd have to wonder how different it would be if it were, the first go, and obviously, I think it would be quite a bit more shallow, so, it's not something to take for granted that
Absolutely not.
these are existing in the lore previously.
Interesting fact. There's actually you can get a total of 16 artifacts out of the 17 Daedric princes.
You can't get all of them. There's always going to be a couple that are choices.
Yeah, there's going to be a couple. Well, I mean, there's 16 artifacts corresponding with the 17 princes, but I think there's about 2 or 3 of the Daedric artifacts that have a choice between 2 items.
Yeah, I know, like the Clavicus Vial one, you get the choice between a mask and I think his axe.
Yeah, the Rueful Axe.
Yeah, and I can't imagine how many people chose the axe because I'm not a dog person, but you're chilling
Yeah,
with
why
that
would
guy for quite a bit before you complete that quest, and he's a nice guy. He
He's
hasn't
just doing
done
his
anything
job.
wrong. Yeah, and then the guy goes, "You can have this real shiny axe if you bust him up a bit." So, I I went with the mask.
Ball
I
and
think I
mask.
think I got the axe on my first play.
Ooh, on your
But look,
first
but look,
playthrough.
it wasn't me. It wasn't me.
Oof.
It was my Argonian lizard. He's a
That guy's a
That
brick
guy's a
job.
piece of
Holy.
shit.
he's a menace.
One thing that you mentioned earlier, Mark, that I think really helped my immersion with the storylines is how well the main plots kind of coincide with each other. Whether you're talking the main dragon and the Civil War storyline, and then like the 3 big other main ones, the Thieves Guild, the Companions, and the College of Winterhold, is they all seem to kind of sprawl the map and go to those different areas. Like even if you do Thieves Guild quest lines, it'll take you to the college, right? And like vice versa with some of the other ones. So they do a really good job of not being separate stories, but forcing you to interact with other places that have a story that you could participate in currently at the same time.
Yeah, and also making sure the player kind of finds their way to all these important set pieces.
Yeah, the way that they composed the story and the quests is masterful. I mean, like we've been saying about choosing your own stuff versus following given quest lines, they make sure that even if you're following the quest lines, you will interact with locations and NPCs that will get you into other quest lines. Like it's not something that you have to leave what you're doing necessarily to find. So it's always pushing the player to try new stuff and get
And the
involved
funniest
in.
part is when you just like brush it off and just keep exploring anyways. Like that's cool, but I want to see what's over here.
It's like, yeah, I'm the Dragonborn. I got things to do, but I'll check it out. I'll come back. Like, has anyone ever, because I know this is an option when you first get initiated into the Dark Brotherhood. Have you ever just not done that and kill
Oh, killed Ingrid.
You
killing
can
her,
kill
and then
Astrid. Yeah.
Astrid, sorry.
Yeah.
yeah, and then you just go on a killing spree and throughout the Dark Brotherhood just to eliminate them?
Yeah, no, if you leave the hut or the cottage that you find yourself in, you lose the option to join, obviously.
Yeah.
But it starts an alternative quest to destroy the Dark Brotherhood, which is incredibly interesting. It's not just decline the quest and move on with your day.
Yeah.
It gives you something new to do that's emerged because of your choice here.
Like,
And
I
I'd also
remember.
like to point out how interesting sorry, Mark. I'd
No
also like
worries.
to point out how interesting the start of this quest is where, it doesn't push you to do it, but if you happen to sleep once you've met the requirements, all of a sudden you're there. You're in it. It's not like someone said, "Hey, let's go do this now. You've been kidnapped." It's a really unexpected start of this quest line.
And that quest line is a next level to the Red Guard woman one you're talking about before, where you don't get the story. It's like you can kill, you're ordered to kill, and like you have to try to figure out, who's the person you're supposed to kill, who's the mark. And then Asher just explains to you, it doesn't matter. I told you to kill someone, you killed someone. You're like,
Mhm.
well, shit.
Yeah. Though I think they make it a bit easier by making that one Khajiit guy just an ass.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, you could kill the woman or the sellsword, but that cat guy literally says he'll have you killed because he's powerful and what's he say? He takes men's daughters. Like it's one of his first lines. I was like, oh,
Whoa.
this guy doesn't seem very good.
This guy is literally asking for it.
Yeah, that guy is pretty evil. So they make the choice a bit easier in that case because otherwise, I feel like players would be more likely to leave and not get the Thieves
That's
Guild
true.
or the
Yeah.
Dark Brotherhood quest line.
I think from my like myself, like not just like in my in-game character, but like myself, I never had the stomach to go through a Dark Brotherhood questline in either Oblivion or Skyrim. It's like no,
I mean,
it's just
being
wrong.
a stealth archer, I was really inclined because they got some nice get-ups.
Like I remember like wanting to do the Thieves Guild because you get the Nightingale armor, and I thought like that's like one by far like the best looking armor sets in the game. On top of like
Definitely
the
best cape.
Oh yeah.
What's neat about the Dark Brotherhood one is you don't understand the repercussions of killing Astrid. Like if you follow through the entirety of the Dark Brotherhood questline, you literally kill the Emperor.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I've never done like the destroy the
Oh,
Brotherhood
wasn't it
quest.
General Tullius, not the actual Emperor, or
No, you murder that boy on his boat. That's what you get, you 1% piece of shit.
I want to talk about what something that Bethesda actually does in kind of all these games really well is these kind of micro stories that they'll tell throughout the environment. And these will usually be without any characters or dialogue involved. So, like an example is like I found like a little hut next to a river with a bear outside of it, and so obviously you kill the bear, and then you go inside the hut and you'll see that there's someone that's been brutally mauled inside, and it's like they never had to say like there's no note on the ground that says, "Oh God, I'm about to be killed by a bear." It's this kind of they let you put two and two together just throughout the environment, and there's tons of these examples.
with like environmental storytelling that
Yeah, I
really
think
sticks out.
Skyrim and Bethesda, in this game at least, I don't have much experience with their other games, but it's like a masterclass in environmental storytelling at the same level as I think the Dark Souls series is, where there is so much lore, world building, and depth to be found just in how, items have been placed in an environment or certain
Yeah,
items existing environments that they wouldn't in others. Like one that really stuck out to me was a quest line that I'd started where a mine has been overrun by Draugr because the guy outside and the guards say that they were digging and accidentally dug too deep and breached old crypt, old Nord crypt. So, they say like, called Legion to come and deal with, and you're like, nah, I got this. So you go in, you walk through a mine, and eventually you get to a point in the mine where there's a big like sinkhole, essentially, like this big collapse in the middle, and you jump down, and there's a dead miner on the top of the rubble, and, they didn't need to do that. It could have just been a hole and they said there was a collapse and whatever, but it was just a neat little thing they did that's like there was someone mining this. This is the reason that this collapsed, that this guy hit something, the whole thing fell open and he died because of it. And it's just this little extra detail that made that experience and the world surrounding it more alive and more interesting.
and then there's a certain like logic they kind of pass on to you or they make clear to you
Mhm.
through the placement, like you said, which is not something that a lot of open world games like this do. But I think their engine or their style is uniquely positioned to help them do this, just with how easy it is to have all these different little items that they can place around to make like a little tableau.
Mhm.
Does anyone remember the unusual gems that are like scattered throughout the world?
Hmm.
And
I
always going,
do.
what is
I've
this
never
for?
completed that.
Yeah, screw that.
Well, there's also a couple that are missable,
Yeah.
that are unobtainable after a certain point, which is frustrating.
But yeah, with the environmental storytelling again, I think like other examples are, if you go into a alchemist home, they're gonna have a lot of potions and enchanting materials and ruined books and all that stuff. And I think that's, if you're looking for certain materials, if you need it, or otherwise it's just an interesting way to build up this character, make them more real. It's really interesting that there's logic to where things are placed. You go to that bear cabin, and there's going to be hunting stuff. There's going to be a bow. There's going to be hunter's clothes and like rags and some food for him for living there. So I think that's a really interesting way they managed to flesh out characters in the game as well. Instead of just telling you, they show you.
There's also a lot to learn just from attention to detail stuff. Like there are quest lines, like Isolde's one of the merchants that hangs around in Whiterun. And if you go around the map and do certain quests, you can find out that, she trades with certain people and you could kind of piece together that she's kind of part of the skooma drug trade and this and that. And she kind of, has ties to this big skooma den in the area. And it's not outright says that. You don't really confront her about that, but these are just kind of things you can read into by Like for example, with Isolde, you can find a note on some guy you kill saying, like, I don't care, get me the shipment of this stuff from the Khajiit. And it's just really nice touch is that's, you totally could gloss over that if A, you just forgot who Isolde is, or like B, didn't bother to check all the loot on people. So they really reward you.
Yeah, it's kind of as well as fleshing out the world and story, it really makes you as a player feel smarter. Like one of the things I hate the most in media is, the creator making me feel like I'm an idiot, where it's like they feel like they need to tell you and explain to you and not letting you figure it out for yourself.
So American cinema, essentially.
So I think, Skyrim does it really well where you can miss things and they don't handhold you throughout the experience trying to make sure you notice everything.
Like how it's like vaguely hinted that Warwick said it's secretly a Daedric cult.
Yeah, Rourke said that's right because they say that like they have amazing crop growth and there's like no water around, and then you try to ask them about things and they won't tell you. It's just like, oh, I don't know, we work really hard, and then if you go into their homes and stuff, you can find books in their homes about Daedra.
And soul gems for some reason.
Yeah, and it just really lends to this whole game really committing to this idea of discovery and exploration, and they're willing to reward the player in every possible facet, not just gameplay.
And not reward them alternatively. If they don't look for it or they don't find it, they won't experience it.
But it won't detract necessarily.
Yeah, they will always experience something else.
Yeah.
Now, I think one other thing that a little item that tends to build the world for me, but is quite frustrating at the same time, I think, are the books in world.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh, I think one way, obviously they tell stories or they flesh out stuff like very obviously, but I think one thing that it does that makes the universe more believable for me in particular is that you can gain levels by reading a book about a subject that you can level. If there's something about war tactics or something, you might level up a combat ability. And it was a really interesting way for them to introduce in-game mechanics and leveling to story and lore mechanic.
It's like in real life. If you read a book, you probably
Yeah, it
feel
makes
good.
sense.
Although in real life, if you pick up a book and only read the first page and put it down, you're gonna learn too much. Not that
Usually
I
the
do
title.
that in Skyrim, please.
It's the downside to the books is you want to read them. At least I find myself I want to read them, but some of them really drag on.
That's sort of a theme in Skyrim is variance of quality. Between the books, some of the stuff you can read in books are just so freaking boring. Same with some quest lines. Some of the quest lines are like, I don't even know why this was a quest. I could have just gone around and done this dungeon without any form of backstory and it wouldn't have changed my experience. But part of that leads into when you do find the banger quests. And it's just such a roller coaster of this quest sucked. Wow, this quest was amazing. I want to find another one like that.
I mean, there was one book that I found recently in it that's part of a quest line, and I can't remember the book, but the content was essentially talking about this smith, and he has this apprentice, and she's this. They describe her as obviously beautiful, but you can't see her face, and it's this whole thing about eventually she disappears and they're spending a lot of time together without other people seeing what's going on. And, it's sort of building this interesting story. But eventually, I've been reading it for like 5 or so minutes, a bit longer maybe. I'm like, huh, this is interesting, but it's dragging on a little. I wonder how much more there is. So I started flipping through the pages. I was like a third of the way through this book. Like, this was a whole short story. This wasn't just like some flavor text in game. So I found myself putting it like skipping to the end, reading the last couple pages because, aside from the type they use being hard to read in the first place, especially if you're, on a TV like 10 feet away from you, it's painful to read long sections of dialogue and books in the game.
And the other thing, and I wish they had, well, I'm not sure if this would have been better necessarily, but Dragon Age is also a game that throws a lot of secondary text at the player, and Mass Effect 2, which is another BioWare title. But what they'll do in those games is they'll just give you like codex pages that you can access at any time, like just through the menu. And whilst that's a less realistic way of presenting the information to the player, where in Skyrim, obviously, if you pick up a book, like it's right there. That's where the information is, and it makes sense that your character is reading it from that book. It would have been nice if there was some way. I mean, obviously, you can pick up a book and keep it with you, but then that incurs a weight. It weighs you down to do that, so it's not exactly feasible.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely seems like a decision about in-world rules compared to sort of the convenience of it. And I think there's definitely an argument to be made whether it was the right choice or not. I definitely enjoy that there's the logic applied to it, where the information's in the book, the story's in the book. You have to read the book, and I find myself collecting a lot and storing it in a library at my in-game home. So, it's extra work, and I don't necessarily find myself going back to read them because it is extra work. But so at the same time, it's like I would enjoy being able to just read it whenever I find the time to.
One thing I wish that they did add was a feature, like just like a red feature or like a little mark beside the book. So if
Oh
I've
yeah.
picked up the book and I've looked through it before, because I can't remember all the titles of the books, there's a lot of them. So I would just look at one because you find whole bookshelves at times, so they're just laying all over the place. Just something to indicate that, like, okay, I've been through this one. Or if I'm just hunting for skill points, right? Okay, been through these books. There's no skill points in there. I can move on.
I believe Witcher 3 does something similar where you'll just gray out the item that you read it. And it's like, okay, good. Like I don't need to
Yeah,
keep picking it up from when I'm looting through someone's house.
it's a nice simple change, but it would really add to the flow and the quality of life.
So are we gonna send Bethesda our Elder Scrolls 6 wish
Yes.
list after all this? Okay.
I'm gonna write them a whole short story and I want them to make it a booking game.
About that, I kind of had a thought just now. If it's just a 93-person team working on this, how many people do they have dedicated to story? Do they have just like 4 or 5 guys just like throwing words up onto their computers? Because like there's a ton of content.
They
We'll
probably have
get
like
the
a big
interns to do it.
lore like circle that like makes sure like story is consistent between like all the games and all
Oh,
the
that's a good
in-game
point.
items.
Yeah, because there's definitely a history too. So you really do have to double check and make sure you're not putting more plot holes than necessary into your game.
Compared to like a lot of other games.
So maybe we can move on and talk about, I guess, some of the presentation aspects in this game. And I'll just start off by saying the thing that breaks the immersion in this game and Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 the most for me is seeing these pretty janky and clunky character animations where, you know, you'll see a character pull out their weapon and then they'll play the same voice line that you've heard a hundred
Never should have
times.
come
Like,
here.
never should have come here. Yeah, exactly. And it's those kind of things where it really, really shows the game's age. And I mean, even at the time, it wasn't that great. It was that kind of thing where it was, you went with it because that's what they had.
Yeah, I think though the animation, there's definitely clear. Like games will often do something where they have different animations for different actions, like an idle animation, a walk animation, a run, pulling your weapon, swinging, but they'll tend to do something to bridge it. So they'll have some way of like blending the two animations so that it feels more natural. It doesn't feel janky, and that's something that I don't think Skyrim does, and if it does, it doesn't do it well. And I think the
Hmm.
biggest offender in the entire game has to be the mining. If you've ever mined
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah, you
you
just
know that
stand
1, if you're in first person, it pulls you to third person for some reason. 2, you jump to wherever
And you
the
just moonwalk over there.
yeah, you appear wherever the animation requires you to be on the ore vein to mine. There's no dynamic to that, which doesn't seem necessary considering it's just a rock. You can hit it from anywhere. And 3, because the actual hitting animation has no weight behind it. There's no, you're swinging a giant wrought iron pickaxe and you just sort of it's like hitting it with a feather. Your character's slowly going, eh.
I can't
There's a
remember.
So
Do you
pink.
physically need the pickaxe to actually do those?
you do,
Mining?
yeah.
Okay.
And then the only indication that you've completed your task is that the streaks of metal from the ore just instantly vanish. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
ore veins depleted.
So I think, it might have been the YouTube channel Every Frame or no. It was there's a YouTuber who talks about game animation. New Frame Plus, I think his channel is called, and there's a video he does about the mining animation, and he goes into detail about why it is wrong, what they could have done to make it better, and it really goes to, like, you realize that they really didn't try on that, that they put it in and they ignored it, and there might have been reasons for that, but it's very obviously not a completed animation cycle.
Well, I've always wondered if this was just a limitation of the engine they're using because it's a problem that is still persisting because they're still using it in Fallout 4 and apparently their upcoming titles as well.
Well, I mean, I don't think so. There's more fluid animations. Like I think the mining one is an example of the worst one, and there's obviously better animations within the game. So I think it's just a lack of attention to it, or maybe a lack of time invested.
Maybe, but I think the problem is that, it's not, the mining's the worst one, I think, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of really bad ones still. Like dragons are, I don't even know what they are. They're animated somehow, like stop motion or freaking claymation or something. But
Yeah, it's
their
definitely
their
very
physics
clunky.
doesn't make sense. Their movement doesn't make sense. Nothing about them except maybe their attack animations make sense. And if that's an issue with the engine, because I'd assume that the major enemy type, in this game is supposed to be polished as hell, but it clearly isn't. And if that's due to engine limitations and how it's built, then it really goes to show, like, should they still be using it? Like, obviously, devs will upgrade in-house engines over time and build on top, but if it's so busted just from the base level, how much can they improve it inherently to actually change all of the issues with it?
Well, the engine is just a set of tools, really. So if it's a certain amount of tools that deal with like how I can't remember what the word is, but how the polygons are structured and how materials are laid out onto surfaces, or like if it's just animation tools that give code like motion to things. I mean, they could probably increase how well that works, or just rewrite parts of it. Like in Fallout 4, it's the same engine. They didn't put in a big iteration, but either there's obviously a difference between the animations on some of the larger robots in Fallout 4 and even just the Draugr in Skyrim. There's something between there that I don't think it's a limitation of the engine. It's they weren't like however they programmed certain tools either wasn't very effective and they redid it, or they're just not putting in effort. I don't know. I don't know what the deal is here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to consider would be, compare Skyrim to another game of the time and its presentation, or Fallout 4, which is a more modern example, and compare that to another game of its time. Like, is it still showing these issues even if they've improved upon stuff?
I'd say in Fallout 4, I know there's still this kind of lack of fluidity between, like, transitioning between different animations a little. You can still see when characters begin to interact with a new object, like a
Yeah, there's like that
workbench
slight
or a
pause, like,
chair.
oh,
Yeah, that slight pause, exactly.
Yeah, so that strikes me as, you know, either an engine limitation or pure laziness in development.
That to me sounds more like a limit, like a gap in the logic, right? That's not so much the actual animation, so much as the logic dictating what animations they're going through.
Right, but if every other game animation is doesn't have this issue, then why is theirs?
well, I mean, you're also going from like you're rendering like all the NPCs that are around you, all their
I mean, there's
animations that they're
not
supposed to
that
do.
many compared to modern games. Like it's not pushing any boundaries graphically. So I don't think the excuse that they need to use so much processing power to render the rest of the world is a valid one. I think that maybe it was in the original Skyrim. There could have been a limit to how much they could render at one time and still have more complexity to it. But
That might as well be what we're talking about. I mean, they don't really change any of that sort of thing when they do remasters.
Yeah, like you're like this game was made for PS3 and Xbox 360 and like PC tech at that time, and with just the remasters, just like they just redid it graphically from a
well,
graphic
but the
standpoint.
thing is graphics are part of presentation. they're trying
Right.
to improve the presentation and animations are janky, then I obviously it's not an easy task to adjust like game wide the animations playing and how they're worked to flow. But if it's a remaster, this is supposed to be the copy of the game, and if they're touting that it's a graphic overhaul and it's enhanced like crazy, then still having major presentation issues, then I don't know what the problem is there.
Problem is the cash grab. They didn't actually do anything. Anyways, we been
Okay,
there, done
yeah.
that.
Now, one thing I'd actually like to talk about in terms of presentation is the music,
Oh yeah,
because
good
goddamn,
stuff.
Is
that's the good shit right there.
that what gets you up in the morning? Like,
Oh
oh
yeah.
man.
Yeah, I fall asleep thinking about the music. I wake up excited to listen to the music. It's
You wake up, your alarm is the Dova King theme
yeah,
song.
it's what keeps me going.
Get you
And
pumped.
you mentioned the Dovahkiin theme there, and that's probably the first interaction or experience almost everyone had with this game when the trailers first came out, and that theme plays for the first time. It's
No, it
it's
was
like
bumping.
it's
Like,
jaw dropping. That thing was so well made. It fits the theming and the world so well. And I think basically every song in this game is to the same level, whether it's an ambient sort of overworld music that's playing, or if it's another theme. I think the composer for this game did an incredible job.
Yeah, the way that they switch through themes, and it's not always fluid because this game's obviously super janky. But the way, like, when a dragon shows up, the theme will change. When you enter combat, the theme will change, or depending on when you exit the holds into night or day, the themes are different. It really is incredible how they seem to have a different, unique piece of music for every scenario.
Yeah, and going back, we've spoken about how the graphics aren't great, but you still get epic visuals. Like the visuals are still jaw dropping a lot of the time, just due to the composition and the way they almost do greater reality in terms of how things look.
Yeah, it really is an odd juxtaposition where you'll be going around and you'll be doing, combat and like you said, some of the animations that aren't so smooth. You're thinking like, oh, this game's like not very pretty, super fun anyways. And then like all of a sudden you'll be like walking up a windy road in like Hjalmarch, and then all of a sudden it's nighttime and there's the northern lights are going and
Oh
the
yeah.
moon is huge and like almost pink colored, and the music is playing and the atmosphere is incredible, and you're like, what
Mm.
do you mean this game is gorgeous? It's not gorgeous. This game's ugly as hell. But
Yeah.
all the things kind of
So you
come
trying to trick
together
me?
to create this atmosphere.
Yeah, some of the best moments in this game are the best points that just happened were going up a mountain and it becomes dusk or dawn, and you get all the pinks and the reds and the sun is coming through trees and stuff, and then the music kind of starts to swell up, and it's this whole like oftentimes you find yourself, you'll just stand there and look out over whatever environment is below you, and you just get this whole shot of the world and how like epic it really is. And
It's a bizarre attention to detail in some of the graphics that it's why is there no attention to detail in the rest of the game? Like you'll be walking in snowy areas and just the way that the snow blows off and blows around in the area, it'll blow off like certain cliff faces. Just the animations for that is like really nicely done and really beautiful. And it's a bizarre touch that is so welcome, but could have used some of that work somewhere else.
but I think it really goes to show them that they knew what builds this world and what makes it incredible. They knew that perfect graphics and absolute realism and maybe even physics, I guess we deal with that enough in the game, isn't as important as creating these moments of awe and the emotion associated with the snow coming off of the trees, blowing off in the wind, and the sun, the god rays coming through branches, and the sky, the colors it has, and the northern lights, and all of that. The rest isn't as important in creating that experience of wow, this is amazing or this is beautiful.
Well, they definitely take the opportunities to show it off when you
Hmm.
exit certain dungeons and
They
stuff,
know
where they
they
give you
have
these
the good
set
shit.
pieces. Yeah, they know they got the goods.
It's a great example of how making these masterful landscapes and these blendings of music and world and atmosphere can create like an entirely new experience that is almost has nothing to do with the gameplay really, and it is just a matter of presentation. And another thing that sticks out in my mind is in Bioshock Infinite when you first step onto Columbia and they open the doors. And it's not even a gameplay moment necessarily. It's really almost more like a movie at that point. But it's interesting how when you have these awe-inspiring visuals, it will absolutely elevate the experience, even though you're not really doing anything and you're really just taking it in.
Hmm.
Especially when in the remastered of Skyrim, how they redid the shadows and they added depth of field and they added the god rays. Like it just adds that much more like crisp to the graphical presentation. Especially when on a PC, where you can just install an EMB and just kind of redo how the game renders lighting.
And I think there's two things to say there, and I think that we need to be careful to clarify.
Yeah, yeah. Like again, like it's a mod,
Yeah, one thing is, allowing mods to change our opinion
but
of a
it,
video
it's
game,
it's
and
showing
two,
how like like the engine's capable of that.
yeah, they just chose not to do it. So then is it really count? But two is we have to define graphics and visuals because the graphics suck. The technical detail isn't great, but the visuals are incredible. What they were able to do with it is
The
incredible.
presentation.
Yeah. So there is a difference there between graphics and
Right.
visuals.
But you're right, Mark. People have taken whatever. People have taken graphical mods in Skyrim to like the nth degree. Like you can get some graphic mods that make Skyrim absolutely unrecognizable, or you can download mods with areas that kind of show what Bethesda could have done with environments, and it's almost kind of sad that the base game doesn't have that. And honestly, obviously, these people have put hundreds of hours into it, but
Yeah, it's what they could have done with unlimited time and unlimited resources. But
mhm.
I mean, definitely mods are a good thing. I mean, it's a great way to open the door to kind of elevating a game to a height it probably never could have realistically gotten to with the studio constraints that it had.
Or just add replayability.
Yeah, I mean I've used quite a bit of mods I've mentioned in this playthrough, most recent playthrough, and it's breathed so much new life into the game. Like I think one that's very minor, but I think adds quite a bit is there's a mod called Forests of Skyrim. And once you use it, you realize that a lot of the forests in game are very, it's the typical older game forest that's very sparse. It's not very dense. It's not very forest like. So suddenly adding this density and a bit of variety into the trees and, stuff like that really adds to the visual presentation, and it really improves the actual experience because of that.
Going back to an earlier point when I brought up the Dice 2012 keynote, one of the things that was in their montage of like they spent an entire week of devs just making a bunch of random stuff for the game within Skyrim, and like one of the things was seasonal foliage and snow footprints. That when I realized like, oh, that was just not in the game already, and it took like a dev like 1 week to do that. How come that's not in the game now?
Well, you always have to make a choice when you're designing a game or any piece of media to because if you're going to assign resources to this snow footprint mechanic, then you have to take away resources from potentially something else that might be maybe more impactful or more important.
Right.
Yeah, like how often do you even see your tracks? And I imagine the way it would have been implemented isn't like a permanent environmental change where you could go back 10 minutes later and see the footprints and the path you've taken. I imagine it's the same way a lot of games that have done footprints in the past are where,
Like
it's a
eventually
little,
it just covers up and then it goes
yeah,
away.
or it fades
Like
off.
snow, yeah.
So
Yeah.
is it really worth it if you're not going to be seeing it?
Well, this was just like not just your character leaving behind footprints, but like monsters and other NPCs.
Well, that would be interesting if it were more modern.
Persistent.
Yeah, if it because, no games, really up until now have had persistent tracks. I think, God of War for the, PlayStation 4, the, reboot did have quite complex
Yeah, they're beautiful.
tracks in snow, and I think they even like showed it off in some technical presentations because it is a complex thing to code and develop and add to a game, and it does take resources to keep that in memory. These variable changes in the environment that are entirely player derivatives. So a game from 2011, as much as mods can do for it, maybe can't handle constant world changes based on player inputs, which is not a fault of its own game.
You gotta also consider, like, maybe they put that in, but what are they gonna break while putting that in, you know?
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
true.
My horse not gonna walk upside down? Right? You can't trust Bethesda sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe we move on to a question bonus round.
Ooh.
We'll start off with Cam here. And what do you think is Skyrim's worst failing, and what do you think should be improved on, most importantly, in the next game?
Elder Scrolls 6. I think the biggest failing that Skyrim really has is it fails to innovate combat. It fails to make encounters feel different. Even like there is some difference in the way some mobs behave, but really to me, they all kind of feel the same. And I think one thing that they could have done is just have different attack patterns. Or for example, there are some enemies that do this. So or have different gimmicks. The Galder quest line when you're trying to put together the pieces of this ancient amulet together, there is one enemy where he spawns clones of himself and they shoot arrows at you and you have to find out which is the real one and then damage the real one, and then after that they'll teleport away and they'll do different things like that. And I just feel like that's something that Skyrim was missing. It just needed more of that. It needed more different gameplay loops.
Yeah, more variety. I think that's fair.
And to that extent also things like puzzles. I know you've kind of touched on puzzles, but puzzles honestly felt pretty lame to me, especially for a game where you spend like a massive amount of time delving through dungeons to find and do things. I just feel like this game should have like some decent puzzles, and if not in every dungeon, like there should at least be like 50% of them should have a decent puzzle or maybe more of a quirk to them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I hope they now have the resources to pursue, considering their pretty incredible success based on just
Hmm.
this title, not even to mention their other successes with Fallout.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if they don't do it themselves later with their new experiences and can like being able to learn from other games, I think when Nintendo eventually buys Bethesda in the year 20XX, that they will really flesh that out a bit more.
Can't wait. Move on to Evan. So we've talked about how some of the core loops like smithing and enchanting and that sort of thing, and the leveling mechanic can be kind of addicting and kind of gives you that feeling of needing to just get one more level. Um, do you think that games should strive to have these kind of just try to maybe make the player get addicted to the gameplay loops that don't really require a lot of skillful input?
Well, I think the thing is, especially in game design, there are like I'd argue that most games have loops that are intended to be almost addictive. Like a game that doesn't have a mechanic that grabs the player and makes them think I want to keep doing that isn't going to be a successful game. So I think ones that do it really well, we're entirely unaware that it's happening.
Hmm.
But in terms of Skyrim, I mean, like you said, there's fairly shallow gameplay mechanics that cause these sort of experience loops, and this almost like you say addicting, you need to keep doing this to like, keep leveling and get more perks and experiences. Like I'd argue that smithing, I think we mentioned earlier that it's not as deep a mechanic as it could have been, where it isn't utilized to its full potential due to other gameplay elements. But it's you end up just crafting easy to craft things to exploit the mechanics, and I think in that sense, it's not good. Like you shouldn't put something in there that's exploitative or predatory or required to progress if if the person isn't going to grind. If grinding is required to experience something later in the game or to even progress in general, then I don't think that it's something that should be added. Otherwise, I think if it adds value or, keeps the player invested or keeps them wanting to play, then it can be a good thing.
I think it depends on the player, right? I think some people like grinding, and I think some people don't.
Yeah, that's also true. It's kind of a subjective thing, and it's important to remember that even just something as basic as leveling up in any RPG is meant to be kind of an addicting loop, but
Yeah,
it's
you can
something that
argue
pretty
that for
basic.
sure.
And there's typically an award at the end
Yeah,
of the grind that makes it up, I guess.
Yeah, there's a it's the bell that once you ring that level up bell, you get a treat. So
It's all about the payoff.
yeah.
I salivate every time.
I mean, yeah, it makes sense that from a developer's perspective that you want the player to feel, you want them to keep playing, obviously.
Yeah, I mean the far reaches of this goes to like mobile sort of gotcha games where
Yeah,
they are absolutely blatantly exploitative and predatory practices in how they're designed. And you can sometimes see light versions or even fairly bad versions of that, like in loot boxes and how that's become more of an issue lately. But I think for the most part, essentially every game has some kind of a loop that they use to keep the player invested, but it depends really on how extreme it is.
right. Well, for our last question, we'll go to Mark. This will be kind of about the storytelling and the world building. What do you think this game does well in terms of like the storytelling and the world building in the context of it being an open-ended RPG experience where not every player is gonna have the same experience?
That's a good question. I think that as we, I guess, all agree that the game definitely has like a masterclass when it comes to environmental storytelling and quest design. Although, like I will say, there is a bit of an inconsistency to how some quest stories are written. But other than that, like I think in terms of an open-ended RPG experience, like you can come in this like you don't necessarily have to be the Dragonborn. Like you can just go off and do whatever you want within the world and just kind of make your own story, which definitely lends itself to this, you know, the game being in this giant open world sandbox in that sense. Like you do have the main quest, like it's completely optional. Like you can just do whatever you want. You can go just running around, see the sights, experience like side quests or faction quests.
Yeah, they deliver on the sandbox premise in a great way.
Oh, definitely. And
They
then
committed to it in every facet, pretty much.
Yeah, I think one of the like we've said already, the best thing it does in terms of that is giving you that pure role playing experience where you can do whatever you want and there's not necessarily a downside to it.
exactly. And like I know, like coming from this game, like a lot of people all over the world, over the internet, have like written fan fiction of their own characters or had like artwork commissioned of their characters, and like different lenses of like like this is my character, this is my story, and it can be whatever I want it to be.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's going to be it for this episode. You guys can join us next time where we're going to be discussing the first Uncharted game, Drake's Fortune. So this is GameDive. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, this is Perry. Thanks for listening to GameDive. Make sure to join in on the discussion below and let us know what your thoughts are about the game. And if you enjoyed the discussion, you can drop us a like. GameDive is a bi-weekly podcast, so be sure to subscribe and check back every other Tuesday for a brand new episode.